Hi, I'm Seraphine. I married into a family who smiled at me across dinner tables, right before handing me a prenup and telling me, it's just a formality. I signed it because I believed in love more than law. But when I inherited $32 million from a grandmother they tried to erase, those same smiles turned into demands. And the man I thought would protect me? He sat beside them with a pen. They watched me closely until I watched back. What kind of family plans your future and your downfall in the same breath? The night air in Westlake Hills felt thicker than usual. Maybe it was just me. The mansion looked like something out of a magazine cover. Pristine hedges, soft lighting, and that silent pressure money brings. I had worn the peach silk dress Valerian loved, the one he said made me look like I belonged. Back then, I believed him. Inside, the dining room was set like a gallery. Too perfect, too calculated. The long mahogany table, the silver that could blind you, the wine glasses that barely touched lips. Laughter floated around like perfume. I remember thinking, maybe tonight I'll finally feel like family. Callista, Valerian's mother, was seated at the head of the table. She wore that rehearsed smile I'd come to recognize. You know the kind. Thin, knowing, just polite enough to pass as Southern charm. Halfway through the main course, she set her glass down with a soft clink, folded her napkin with surgical precision, and turned to me. "We have a little formality," she said, her tone almost musical. Valerian stiffened beside me. She reached beneath the table and produced a manila folder. Sleek. Prepared. Expected. I froze. When I opened it, the words punched me in the chest before my eyes could finish scanning. A prenuptial agreement. Not a gentle suggestion. Not a conversation. A directive. "You'll leave with whatever you came in with," Callista said smoothly, as if she were announcing dessert. "It's standard, sweetheart. We just want to protect Valerian's future." I looked at Valerian. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he refilled his wine, twice. I waited. Waited for him to speak, to object, to tell his mother this was unnecessary. But silence sat between us like an invited guest. My grandmother used to say, "Silence doesn't always mean agreement. Sometimes it's just cowardice dressed as peace." I heard her voice in my head like a warning bell. I had never asked for their money. Never hinted. I worked hard. I paid my bills. I had a future before him. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was control. I flipped through the pages, nodding like I understood, though every word felt like a betrayal. There was a clause about the house. His house. A clause about future inheritances. His legacy. And what did I get? Nothing. Not even a seat at the real table. Still, I smiled, signed it. My hand trembled only slightly. My signature at the bottom was clean, professional. That night, something inside me shifted. Not enough to shatter, but enough to bend. As we continued dinner, laughter returned like nothing happened. Callista talked about a new art installation. Andrew, Valerian's father, made a toast about family values. I barely heard them. My ears were ringing with one truth. I wasn't marrying into a family. I was merging with an institution. Later, Valerian and I walked to the car in silence. The gravel crunched under my heels, louder than anything either of us said. As we reached the door, Callista leaned in, her perfume a little too sweet, her voice syrupy and cruel. "You'll thank me one day, when you're not left with nothing." I turned back toward the glowing mansion, heart pounding. In that moment, something clearer than rage took root. A quiet knowing, a silent vow. I thought marriage would be the start of something warm, something shared. But 2 weeks after that dinner, I moved into Valerian's family estate and felt more like a guest with a checked-out date than a newlywed wife. The house was immaculate. Every vase placed with surgical precision, no cushion ever out of place. The air always faintly scented with vanilla and disapproval. You know the kind of quiet that follows you down a long hallway? Not peaceful, but observed. That was every step I took there. The day I moved in, I hung one framed wedding photo, just one. It was a simple shot of Valerian holding my hand by the courthouse steps. We were smiling, but not too hard. I placed it at the end of the hall, between a painting of some European village and a gilded mirror taller than me. A soft, subtle claim to space. By the next morning, it was gone. I searched every shelf, even behind the curtains, like some kind of detective in pearls. I found it later in the bottom drawer of the guest room dresser, tucked beneath a stack of unused placemats. When I brought it up to Callista at breakfast, she didn't even flinch. Just sipped her grapefruit juice and said, "We don't hang non-family photos in this hallway, dear. It's always been that way." Non-family. That word rang louder than her voice. I managed a tight smile and cut into my omelet. Andrew, her husband, didn't say a word. He never did. Valerian. He was busy checking his phone. That day, I stopped trying to make this house my home. It was a stage, and I was a supporting character, told to stay in her role. Smile. Be elegant. Don't touch the thermostat. Then, one slow Tuesday afternoon, while organizing some donation boxes in the side garage, Leora, Callista's longtime housekeeper, approached me quietly. She looked over her shoulder twice before speaking. "There used to be letters from your grandmother," she said. "She tried to reach you here, but someone burned them." My throat went dry. "Burned?" She nodded once. "They never made it past the foyer." Leora didn't need to say who. She just folded towels like she hadn't detonated a bomb in my chest. My grandmother, Celine, wasn't a woman you ignored. She had survived 2 husbands and the IRS, but to know that she reached out, and that her words were reduced to ash without my knowing, that was something else entirely. I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded, thanked Lyra, and returned to organizing a box of coats I suddenly didn't care about. That night, I started writing in a leather-bound journal Valerian's aunt had given me. It had been intended for wedding recipes or love letters. I used it to document silences. Who didn't speak? What wasn't said? Which corners of the house were colder than others? Not in temperature, but in welcome. My grandmother once told me, "When people try to make you invisible, write yourself back into the story." So I did. I stopped asking Valerian what he wanted for dinner. I stopped waiting up for him. I answered Callista's suggestions with nods and smiles, but never again with effort. My goal wasn't to win them over anymore. My goal was to remember who I was before I tried. That night, I walked onto the back porch alone. The lights of downtown Austin twinkled far in the distance, beautiful but unreachable. My breath came out slow, measured. "If I'm not part of this family," I whispered, "then what the hell am I doing here?" Thursday mornings used to be my quiet escape. Coffee, spreadsheets, and the brief illusion of control. But that one? That one cracked the shell I hadn't realized I was still trying to live in. I was sorting through an electric bill in the upstairs office, the one with more windows than warmth. The screen on my phone lit up. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it, assuming it was another appointment Callista set without telling me, but something in me said answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself politely, formal but gentle. He was calling from the law office of my grandmother Celine's estate. My chest tightened. She had passed, and she had left everything, every last cent, share, and estate, to me. I didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. The lawyer hesitated before continuing, telling me that a courier would deliver a sealed letter that afternoon. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat there in silence, hands clenched around a now meaningless bill. $32 million. That was the number. A number that didn't make sense until it started to make too much sense. Celine had been quiet these past few years, not out of neglect, but because she wasn't allowed to be anything else. She always said, "Real power is in knowing when to hold the silence and when to weaponize it." I had assumed she'd faded into the background, when in truth, she was stepping out of the stage entirely and leaving me the script. The letter came just after lunch, slipped into my hands by a young man in a gray vest who didn't even ask for a signature. On the envelope, her handwriting, for when they've made you doubt everything. Inside, on thick cream paper, in ink I could recognize even in my sleep, were words that didn't just comfort. They woke me up. You deserved more than silence and suspicion. I saw what they did to me, and I see what they're doing to you. This is your key. Build your own door. I folded the letter once, twice, tucked it into my planner like a to-do list that had waited years to be checked off. I didn't tell Valerian, not that night, not the next. Instead, I watched. I measured. Who asked what? Who stopped looking at me like I was a person and started looking like I was a vault? Later that afternoon, I took a drive downtown. No plan, just the need for air that didn't carry the scent of expectations. I parked near a bookshop I used to love. I walked past a window with a closeout sale sign, and there, as if plucked from some strange dream, stood Bryn. He hadn't changed much. Older, sure, wiser in the eyes, the same slightly crooked smile. We locked eyes, both unsure who should speak first. "Seraphine," he said, taking off his sunglasses. "It's been years," I finished, "since graduation. And tequila." He laughed, and just like that, the tension softened. We caught up briefly. His law firm wasn't far from here. He'd been published in some journal. We skipped the parts about past regrets and stuck to the present, until he caught a flicker in my expression. "You always carried more than you let on," he said. "If you ever need someone with a better grip on law than love, call me." I told him I'd think about it. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already added his number to my phone under Plan B. That evening, Valerian asked if I was okay. I told him I'd gotten a call about a death in the family. He looked up from his phone for the first time all day, eyebrows lifted. "Oh? Who?" "My grandmother," I said simply. "Celine." "Damn," he muttered, setting his glass down. "Sorry, that's unexpected." His reaction told me everything I needed to know. Not about his grief, there was none, but about the gears already turning behind his eyes. I poured myself a drink. One, slow. Pour. Then I said it, just loud enough for him to hear as I stared out the window. "It's not the death that's interesting. It's what happens after." A week had passed since I learned about the inheritance. I hadn't told anyone, not Valerian, not Callista, not even my reflection in the bathroom mirror. But somehow, I didn't need to. People's behavior changes faster than headlines, and in that house, the temperature shifted overnight. Callista invited me to brunch on a Thursday. Just the two of us. That had never happened before. I found her already seated on the sunlit terrace, dressed in pale blue silk, a glass of mimosa in her hand, like it had been glued there since birth. She greeted me with an air kiss and a too-sweet, "darling." She'd ordered for me before I arrived, lobster salad and chilled rosé. "You've grown into yourself so beautifully, Seraphine," she said, watching me over her sunglasses. "You know, you'd be the perfect face for our new foundation campaign." I tilted my head slightly, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her lean in. "I didn't know you had a campaign." "Oh, it's early stages." She waved a manicured hand. "But with your grace, your presence, and of course, your story, we could raise so much awareness. My story, my money, my face, but never my name." I smiled like I meant it and took a slow sip of wine. "That's thoughtful, Callista." She continued outlining a vague plan involving media coverage, social media reels, and a gala next season. And just like that, I understood. I was no longer the outsider. I was the asset. Later that night, Valerian lit candles at dinner. Real ones. He cooked risotto, poured my wine, asked me about my day. None of it felt real. "Been thinking," he said casually between bites. "We should simplify things. Open a joint account. I mean, it's just easier, less formal, more us." I looked at him like he'd said we should adopt a pet tiger. "A joint account?" He nodded and slid a folder across the table. It was already filled out, just missing my signature. I picked it up gently, like it might bite. You filled this out? He laughed. Of course. Just trying to make life easier. We're a team, right? I smiled, folded the paper, and tucked it into my planner. Right, a team. But in my head, I heard Celine again. You'll know who someone is by what they expect you to hand over when they're smiling. The next morning, I placed the folder in my safe, unopened. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. From then on, I became the actress they'd always wanted. I wore the dresses Callista complimented, laughed at Valerian's recycled jokes, played hostess when required. But I started observing, writing down who complimented what, who asked about money, who stopped making eye contact when talking to me. There was a rhythm to the game. I was no longer trying to belong. I was studying the set. One afternoon, while adjusting the centerpiece on the dining room table for a charity meeting I hadn't volunteered to host, I jotted a note in my phone. Don't react. Observe. Make them forget you're watching. They didn't notice when I stopped speaking unless spoken to. They thought my silence was agreement, again. But this time, it was strategy. That night, as we lay in bed, Valerian rolled toward me and whispered, We're going to be unstoppable, babe. Your name, my vision. I stared at the ceiling, letting the air conditioner hum fill the space between us. I turned to him with a smile that never reached my eyes. Sure, I murmured. Let's build something, together. I didn't call Bryn right away. I waited a few days, maybe out of pride, maybe out of caution. Maybe I needed to be sure I wasn't making something out of nothing. But deep down, I already knew. When someone hands you a pre-filled joint account application over candlelight, it's not romance, it's positioning. So I texted Bryn, just 2 words. Need coffee? He replied in less than a minute with the address of his law office. We met the next morning. It was one of those crisp Austin mornings that made you think the world could still be kind. I walked in with a copy of the prenup tucked inside my bag, right next to my grandmother's letter. Bryn greeted me with that same crooked grin he wore back in undergrad. He poured coffee into real mugs, not paper cups, and sat across from me at a table full of yellow legal pads and open case files. All right, he said, cracking his knuckles. Let's see what they buried in the fine print. He took the prenup and read it with the kind of concentration that made me remember why I fell for him once. Then he paused. Eyebrows lifted. Well, well, he murmured. You see this clause? It's airtight about Valerian's premarital assets, but postmarital inheritance? Not mentioned. That $32 million? Still yours? I stared at him. You're telling me I don't have to share any of it? Legally, no. Not unless you commingle it into joint accounts or property. It wasn't relief I felt. It was armor. Silent, legal, permanent armor. Bryn leaned back, sipped his coffee. You want a quote for the day? The best revenge isn't loud. It's silent, legal, and permanent. Keep your accounts separate. Keep your records cleaner than your conscience. I smiled without smiling. Can you check something else? He nodded. See if my name appears on any medical directive paperwork, anything related to power of attorney. His brows furrowed, but he said nothing. Give me a few hours? I spent the afternoon at a corner table in a nearby cafe, flipping through my phone, but reading nothing. I didn't go home. I wasn't ready to look at Valerian until I knew more. That evening, Bryn called. You sitting down? Tell me. There's a form filed 6 months ago, medical directive, lists Valerian as primary agent. But there's a clause, temporary control granted to Callista in case of spousal incapacity. I blinked. I didn't sign anything like that. You didn't have to, he said flatly. It was filed under his insurance plan, signed by him. Legally questionable, but not impossible if contested. It's shady as hell. I hung up without another word. That night, I watched Valerian sleep. His face looked peaceful, clueless, but all I could see was a man who, at some point, decided I could be managed. Handled. Delegated. I wasn't naive. I had been optimistic. There's a difference. I didn't cry. I started scanning documents, made copies, opened new accounts under a trust Celine once mentioned. I labeled folders not with dates, but with questions. Why now? What did they think I wouldn't notice? I stopped reacting to smiles. I started timing them. Callista's compliments, logged. Valerian's sudden affection, time-stamped. By the end of the week, I had backup files in 2 locations, a burner phone, and a locked briefcase tucked beneath the floorboards of my old reading nook. One night, as I slid the final document into a folder marked "If They Push Me," my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no contact name, just one message. I saw what they did. Be careful. Not everyone is who you think. I started moving through the house like someone walking across thin ice. Every smile I returned was measured. Every word I spoke was calculated. And every second, I listened. Closer than ever before. They thought silence meant compliance. But the quiet is where people get comfortable, where masks slip. As my grandmother used to say, most people don't slip up when you're angry. They slip up when you're silent. The day after I discovered the medical directive clause, I stopped trying to be subtle. I began logging everything: conversations, glances, who left the room when I entered. If I was going to be a puppet in their production, I'd at least learn the script better than they had. That morning, while going through the emails on the shared iPad, a text popped up. It was from Callista, clearly intended for Valerian. Just keep her happy until we redirect those funds. A few more months won't kill us. I stared at the screen as my blood turned to ice. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I took a screenshot, sent it to my encrypted email, then deleted the original from the iPad. Minutes later, Callista walked into the kitchen with her usual perfect blowout and an air of smugness so thick it choked the room. "I made chamomile," she offered, placing a delicate cup beside me. "You look tired, darling." I thanked her, smiled, and drank half of it, because playing dumb was safer than looking suspicious. 3 days later, during a charity brunch she insisted I host, I made my move. While they fussed over napkin folds and flower arrangements, I slipped my phone under the table and hit record. I excused myself to check on the dessert setup, stepping into the hallway but remaining close enough to hear. From the speaker, their voices came through, quiet, clipped, cruel. "She's softened," Callista whispered. "She'll fold. Just keep pushing the charity angle." Valerian chuckled. "She's so easy when she thinks she's leading." I pressed stop and locked the file behind 2 passwords and a fingerprint scan. There's betrayal in silence. But what they said out loud? That hurt in a new language. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't drink wine or blast music or call anyone. I opened my laptop, installed new encryption software, and uploaded the audio. By morning, I had formed an LLC under my maiden name, a new business account. I updated my will and removed Valerian as emergency contact from every document that mattered. It felt less like rebellion and more like CPR. I wasn't burning bridges, I was building exits. I told them I was flying to San Francisco next week for a women's leadership seminar. That was true, mostly. There was a seminar. I just wouldn't be attending it. I would be meeting with a lawyer who specialized in financial separation without litigation, and another who specialized in discrete asset protection. When I mentioned the trip over dinner, Valerian nodded distractedly and said, "Great. Mom actually had an idea I think you'd love." I glanced up. "She wants you to be the face of our next housing initiative. She said you're our golden ambassador now. Finally part of the story." I placed my fork down gently, dabbed the corners of my mouth with a napkin, and smiled. "Sure," I said. "I'm ready to be seen." 1 week after the audio recording, I stopped pretending. I moved like someone with purpose, not paranoia. The version of me they thought they controlled? She was already packing her bags, mentally, financially, strategically. And while Valerian kissed me goodbye every morning, I started leaving behind just enough breadcrumbs to test who was following them. First, I moved the trust documents from the safe to my dresser. Then, I printed a fake asset summary with exaggerated account values and signed it with a pen I knew Callista had gifted me. I waited. Within 48 hours, Valerian accidentally mentioned the number I'd fabricated during a phone call with his cousin. That was all the confirmation I needed. 3 days later, on my way to meet a friend at the gym, I noticed a gray sedan parked across the street. It was there again later that afternoon, outside a boutique, where I grabbed coffee. I circled the block, took the back exit, and texted an old friend in cybersecurity. "Looks like someone's watching," I told him. He checked the plate. Registered to a private security firm under a Shell LLC, one that just so happened to be linked to one of Valerian's dormant side ventures. "They weren't watching me because they cared," I wrote in my journal. "They were watching because they feared what I'd become. They were right to be afraid." Still, I kept my composure. I smiled during charity meetings. I played the sweet daughter-in-law over dinner. But the blade I carried inside me was sharp now, no longer hidden, just sheathed. That weekend, Valerian dragged me to a party hosted by one of his business partners. Some luxury lakeside home with floor-to-ceiling glass and not an ounce of soul. I knew from the second we arrived, I was being showcased. "You clean up well," someone joked as I walked in. Later, I was grabbing a drink when I overheard it. Two women, probably wives of board members, chatting with that passive-aggressive sweetness Austin women have perfected. "Oh, you're the one who signed that no-cut clause, right?" one said, almost whispering. "Must be nice to marry money. Wish I'd thought of that." Valerian heard it. He was standing 3 feet away, swirling his bourbon. He didn't correct them, didn't defend me. Instead, he chuckled. "You know how families are," he muttered, then moved on to the next conversation like I wasn't standing there burning alive. That was it. The last thread snapped. This wasn't just betrayal, it was entertainment. I didn't react, didn't storm out. I walked into the bathroom, stared at my reflection, and reminded myself who I was before their name came into my life. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Bryn and a forensic accountant he trusted. "Let's make it clean," I said. "I want to freeze everything I can that isn't in both names, and I want to start moving whatever I legally can offshore." He raised an eyebrow. "Quietly?" he asked. "No, invisibly," I said. "We created a contingency fund under a trust structure. New name, new city, backup access." Then I began shifting non-joint assets piece by piece, like a woman moving chess pieces 5 turns ahead. I didn't need to blow anything up. I just needed to be gone before they realized I had left the game. That night, as we watched a documentary on his laptop, Valerian leaned his head into my lap, eyes half closed, voice soft. "You've changed, Seraphine. I don't know if that's a good thing." I ran my fingers through his hair, smiled faintly. "Neither do I." The ballroom shimmered with low lighting and the kind of wealth that only pretends to be humble. Gold-trimmed everything, strings playing in the corner, servers gliding like trained ghosts between clusters of politicians, developers, and socialites who all smelled like entitlement and expensive cologne. I stood near the back wall, champagne flute in hand, watching it all unfold. This stage celebration, hosted by the Anderson Foundation. According to the program, I was being honored tonight for my visionary contributions to their housing initiative. No one mentioned that my contributions were entirely financial, inherited, and silently coerced. My dress was midnight blue, sleek and tailored, not for elegance, but for armor. And when Callista took the podium, I knew the battle had officially begun. She tapped the microphone twice, smiling like the Pope had endorsed her. "Tonight, we celebrate vision, integrity, and family legacy. And we could not have achieved what we have without the heart of this mission. My daughter-in-law, Seraphine." The room clapped, flashes popped. Valerian smiled like he'd just won an election. "She brought warmth and wisdom, and most importantly," Callista added, her voice like butter on poison, "the kind of generosity that defines the Anderson name." They called it generosity, but I called it laundering love with lipstick. I held the applause for 2 beats, then walked toward the stage. Each step sounded louder in my head than the orchestra. I took the mic, nodded once, and gently opened the folder I had brought with me. I didn't prepare a traditional speech, I began, calm and deliberate, because tonight isn't about celebration, it's about clarity. I unfolded the first page. Here's a summary of financial statements showing my inheritance was used, without my consent, to fund this foundation's media campaign. People shifted in their chairs. Here, I continued, placing the next document down, is the original audio transcript between Callista and Valerian, where they referred to me as a golden ambassador and discussed manipulating public image for financial gain. I looked out at the crowd. Many were still. Some reached for their phones. And finally, I said, voice steady, these are the legal filings I submitted this morning, reclaiming the full rights to my inheritance and severing all financial association with the Anderson family. Callista looked like a statue made of cracking porcelain. Valerian stood slowly, hand halfway extended, like he thought he could stop me. I didn't look at him. I didn't come here to be celebrated, I said, my voice cutting through the room like ice. I came to end the performance. I set the microphone down, turned, and walked off stage. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a backward glance. Outside, the air was cool. The valet offered me a coat I hadn't brought. I waved him off and walked toward my car. By the time I got home, my phone buzzed. Notification. The Anderson Foundation's main account has been frozen pending investigation. A second buzz. A message from my lawyer. Ready for round 2? I didn't just burn the bridge. They never saw I'd brought the whole matchbox. The morning after, the gala felt like waking up from surgery. Groggy, surreal, but strangely pain-free. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment downtown, sipping tea as the city moved beneath me. Below, buses hummed, people hustled, and somewhere out there, Callista was spiraling. The front page of every local outlet screamed the same words in different fonts. Philanthropic fraud unveiled at Anderson Gala. A photo of me standing behind the podium, documents in hand, took up half the screen. In the caption, they called me the whistleblower wife. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindicated. But I did feel finished. Reputation takes years to build, I murmured aloud, repeating something Celine used to say, and one truth to collapse. By noon, I got word of their next move. As predicted, the Andersons scrambled to reclaim their narrative. They held a press event at their estate, complete with floral backdrops and strategically diverse speakers. Callista stood in a cream pantsuit, poised and robotic, as she painted me as a confused, disgruntled spouse. She acted alone, she told the press. We had no knowledge of these claims until she made them public. But I had anticipated it. I parked down the block and arrived halfway through the event, dressed simply in black. When the reporters spotted me, the cameras turned like sunflowers toward sunlight. I stepped to the front without invitation and handed every major outlet a cease and desist order, along with a printed summary of forensic audit results and a legal countersuit. This isn't a story about misunderstanding, I said calmly. It's a story about manipulation, forgery, and misappropriation, and it's far from over. Callista didn't blink, but her jaw clenched the way it always did when her mask cracked. Valerian stood behind her like a malfunctioning mannequin, unable to decide whether to speak or vanish. I walked away without taking questions. This time, the press followed me. That night, Bryn texted, "We found it." The forensic accountant he'd hired traced multiple transfers from the Anderson Foundation to shell corporations, companies registered under fake names, but linked back to Callista's cousin. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. By morning, the IRS had opened a formal investigation. Later that week, I passed by their estate on the way to a lunch meeting. From the street, it looked the same: tall gates, manicured hedges, the illusion of permanence. But behind those gates, I knew the house was hemorrhaging. They thought I was just a wife with a signature, I told Bryn over coffee. I turned out to be their subpoena. After filing my final batch of legal documents, I took a walk through my condo. I'd had a few of the court rulings framed, not for display, but for remembrance. They hung in a hallway, only I walked. Just a reminder, I didn't need applause, only proof. I scheduled a session with my therapist, told her I wasn't looking for peace, just confirmation that my sanity hadn't been a casualty. Then I called Leora. "You still looking for something different?" I asked. She laughed, soft and surprised. "Are you offering? I'm building something that doesn't require silence for survival. You in?" She said yes without hesitation. That night, I poured a glass of wine, put my phone on silent, and sat by the window. My reflection stared back at me, older, maybe harder, but undeniably whole. Then the phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before picking up. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "You don't know me, but I think I'm next, and I think you're the only one who can help." I stood, eyes narrowing at the skyline beyond the glass. I thought my story ended with freedom. I didn't expect it to become someone else's rescue. The building where my new office sat didn't have gold door handles or valet service. It had key cards, coded entry, and privacy. After months of being watched, managed, and recorded, I finally had a space that was mine. No curated smiles, no cameras hidden in faux generosity, just glass, concrete, and the truth. 2 weeks had passed since I stood on that gala stage and turned their celebration into an unmasking. The media buzz had quieted slightly, but inside the Anderson estate, chaos was thriving. I hadn't heard from Valerian directly since, but silence from that house wasn't peace. It was planning. That morning, I received a message from my legal team. Short, precise. Both have been summoned. Financial fraud deposition confirmed. Timeline tight. I exhaled slowly, then stood to pour myself a cup of black coffee. It never takes a gunshot to end an empire. Sometimes it's a stamp on a subpoena. By late afternoon, the court had ruled the prenup valid. No surprise there. But my inheritance, the one they'd tried to siphon, disguise, and rebrand as their philanthropic coup, that was ruled entirely separate. Mine, undisputed. Publicly, the ruling read like a footnote. Privately, it was an earthquake. The Anderson family's financials were now subject to a federal audit. The company was bleeding. Valerian had been quietly removed from the board, his image scrubbed from their website like he'd never existed. I walked out of the courthouse without comment, my heels clicking across the marble floors like punctuation. No victory speech, just clarity. That night, I arrived home to find an envelope under my condo door. No name, no return address. My building had secure access. Whoever delivered it knew exactly how to bypass barriers. Inside were 2 flash drives and a typed transcript. Audio recordings. Conversations between Valerian and Callista. Their voices unmistakable, chilling in their casual calculation. "If she gets pregnant," Valerian said on one clip, "we lock it down legally. The kid's a golden key." Callista laughed softly. "Exactly. We make it about family. She'll never leave then." I sat motionless. For the first time in weeks, I felt something raw crawl up my throat. Not grief, not rage, finality. I backed up the files. Then I deleted every fertility app on my phone, logged out of my health trackers, cleared everything, let them have their legacy. I would not be its hostage. The following morning, headlines shifted. The IRS announced a freeze on the Anderson Foundation's main accounts. Every transaction flagged, every dollar accounted for. Their sleek reputation had officially cracked, and this time no press conference could spin it. Valerian appeared in a half-hearted apology video, his tie askew, eyes glassy. "This was a misunderstanding," he said. "A breakdown in internal controls." But the world wasn't buying it anymore. Meanwhile, I signed the incorporation papers for my nonprofit. a foundation built not on image, but on function. Quiet support for women like me, those whose marriages weren't abusive in the visible ways, but in the slow suffocation of autonomy. They used my silence as a weapon. I used their underestimation as my shield. As I slid the signed papers into a manila envelope, a clerk knocked gently on the door. "You have a visitor," she said. "She says she's the next Mrs. Anderson." I looked up from my desk. "Send her in," I said. "Let's see what lies they've told her." The sunlight poured through the windows of my condo like it had never been allowed to shine before. No shadows of surveillance. No tension tiptoeing behind floral centerpieces or polite lies. Just light. Clean and quiet. It had been a week since the court gave its final word. A week since I handed over the last form to launch my nonprofit. 1 week of not hearing from Valerian. 1 week of not thinking about whether I was supposed to be something softer, smaller, more forgiving. Closure didn't come with an apology. It came when I stopped needing one. I had just returned from a coffee meeting with a local women's shelter when the security desk called up to my office. "Ms. Seraphine, there's someone downstairs. Callista Anderson." For a moment, my heart paused. Not from fear, but from sheer disbelief that she'd show up in daylight like a ghost demanding airtime. I met her in the lobby. She was thinner, yes, but not fragile. Her lips were painted the same shade of arrogance. Her heels still echoed like power plays on marble. "You may think you've won," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "But legacies don't die with headlines." I tilted my head, stepped closer. "And control doesn't survive without compliance. You've lost both." She blinked. Just once. But the sting was visible. "I didn't come here to fight," she added, but her tone betrayed her. "I just thought, maybe you'd want to reconsider the narrative. Think long-term." "No," I replied, folding my arms. "I've already written the ending. You just didn't get a part in it." I turned and walked away before she could reply. And this time, I didn't look back. 2 days later, I received a handwritten letter, no return address, but the penmanship was his. Valerian. He didn't apologize. Of course he didn't. Instead, it was a collection of half-reflections and veiled excuses. "I wasn't myself. We got caught up. You were never meant to be hurt." I filed the letter next to the medical directive and the forged signatures. No response, no reaction. Some men don't regret hurting you. They regret that you survived and told everyone. That afternoon, I closed the last joint account. I signed the transfer papers and sent a donation, anonymous, to a national legal defense fund for women escaping financial coercion. I didn't do it for optics. I did it because I had the means and no more excuses. Leora started working with my nonprofit the following week. She walked in with her shoulders back and eyes clearer than I'd ever seen. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about budgets, community outreach, the best way to vet legal partners. I had coffee with Bryn the next day. He looked good, calm, accomplished. We sat at a sidewalk table, talking about city grants and policy reform. When he suggested dinner, I smiled, but gently shook my head. I didn't fight this hard to hand myself over again. I'm still mine for a while. He understood. Later that week, I drove past the Anderson estate. Not to revisit anything, just to confirm for myself that I didn't flinch anymore. I parked across the street, turned the engine off, and sat in silence. They thought removing me from their table was power, but I became the architect of my own kingdom. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A message from the legal desk at my nonprofit. "We received a claim. Looks like someone else lived through the same thing, and they're ready to fight." I stared at the message, then smiled to myself. Maybe my war ended, but my story became someone else's weapon. The conference room buzzed quietly with anticipation. Rows of women, survivors, advocates, donors, sat shoulder to shoulder, their stories stitched invisibly into the seams of their blazers and sweaters. The room didn't need spotlights or smoke machines. It had conviction. I stepped to the podium and exhaled. 2 months had passed since the nonprofit went viral, and the Anderson family's illusion of legacy crumbled beneath the weight of their own schemes. They wrote me out of their future, I began, letting my gaze sweep the room. So I wrote my own, and then published the truth. A few nodded. A few teared up. All listened. Our nonprofit had launched legal aid programs in 8 states. We'd funded 12 full-time attorneys and nearly tripled the number of women able to escape financial abuse without losing custody, dignity, or their sense of self. I wasn't their savior. I was just proof. That week, Callista was formally indicted. Her plea deal fell apart the moment Leora's cousin, a former accountant inside their investment wing, testified. Fraud, perjury, conspiracy. Valerian didn't see a jail cell, but what the court stripped from him couldn't be measured in years. His accounts were emptied, properties seized, his name scrubbed from business registries and foundation plaques. I never stepped foot inside the courtroom. I watched it all unfold from a laptop, surrounded by the team I built, not with charm, but with grit. Some people want to watch their enemies fall, I told Bryn once as we reviewed the newsfeed. I just wanted them to stop stepping on others. A month later, I walked through the skeletal frame of a construction site, our first women's housing complex. There would be 20 units, each with its own mailbox, kitchenette, and no one holding power over the thermostat. On the foundation stone by the entrance, we engraved, "In memory of all those who stayed silent to survive, in honor of those who no longer have to." That night, Bryn and I sat on the steps outside the site, watching the lights of downtown blink to life. He reached out gently, not presumptively. "Dinner sometime?" he asked. I smiled, grateful. "I didn't fight this hard to rebuild me, just to hand her over to someone else," I said softly. He nodded. "I figured. Still worth asking." The next morning, a woman came into the office, mid-30s, tight posture, eyes like mine used to be, scanning every exit, rehearsing every sentence. "I'm not even sure if this is something," she said. "He doesn't hit me, he just makes it hard to leave." I took her hand, steady. "They'll tell you you're crazy. Then they'll tell the world you're bitter. We're here to tell you. You're right." I stood on my balcony that evening, overlooking a city that once watched me fall apart and now watched me build. Not vengeance, not pity. Structure. I didn't think of Valerian or Callista. I thought of me, of who I was before I signed that prenup, of who I became after I stopped apologizing for surviving. I didn't win because they lost, I whispered to the skyline. I won because I walked away still standing, and I never went back. Back inside, I turned off the lights in my office, hung a new sign on the door, "Office hours by appointment only." As I walked out, the phone rang again. I didn't rush to answer. The work wasn't done. But the war? That was over.